On James Wright. The Jewel. There is this cave in the air behind my body that nobody is going to touch. A cloister, a silence, closing around a blossom of fire. When I stand upright in the wind, my bones turn to dark emeralds. James Wright is considered the poet laureate of the working class, and his work focuses on the disenfranchised. He explores themes of isolation and transcendence, focusing particularly on the pains of being an outsider and his own relationship to beauty and nature. James Wright was born in the steel mining town of Martins Ferry, Ohio in 1927. Raised by uneducated parents during the Great Depression, his miserable and impoverished childhood had a profound effect on him as a poet and as a human being. Throughout his life, he suffered from alcoholism and experienced extreme bouts of depression and was treated multiple times in mental institutions for bipolar disorder. His first breakdown happened while he was still in high school. After graduation, determined to make something of his life, he joined the military in 1946 and received an undergraduate degree at Kenyon College thanks to the GI Bill. He went on to receive his master's and doctoral degrees at the University of Washington and taught at the University of Minnesota and Hunter's College in New York City, where he lived until his death. As a professor, he was said to have the magical ability to shock a student into being himself. Even though he won the Pulitzer for his collected works in 1972 and is hailed as one of America's finest contemporary poets, James Wright's path was filled with uncertainty and self-doubt. After publishing his first book, The Green Wall, in 1957, he decided to give up writing altogether, as he could not make an income sufficient to support his first wife and their 2 children. But in July of 1958, he began to write what he thought was his final poem. And on the very day he started to write this farewell, a literary magazine called The Fifties, a magazine of poetry and opinion, arrived in his mailbox. Impassioned by the poetry and literary criticisms therein, he wrote the editor, a fellow poet named Robert Bly, an 18-page letter. This was the beginning of what would be a lifelong friendship, and it gave Wright the inspiration he needed to continue writing. 5 years later, he would publish what is considered his most successful and influential work, The Branch Will Not Break, which included this farewell to poetry, now titled Goodbye to the Poetry of Calcium. Mother of roots, you have not seeded the tall ashes of loneliness for me. Therefore now I go. If I knew the name, your name, all trellises of vineyards and old fire would quicken to shake terribly my earth. Mother of spiraling searches, terrible fable of calcium girl. I crept this afternoon in weeds once more. Casual, daydreaming you might not strike me down. Mother of window sills and journeys, hallower of searching hands. The sight of my blind man makes me want to weep. Tiller of waves or whatever, woman or man, mother of roots or father of diamonds, look, I am nothing. I do not even have ashes to rub into my eyes. Intensely lyrical, James Wright enjoyed experimenting with style and language. In his early poems, he used more traditional verse, but as time passed, he wrote in blank verse and free verse. He also translated many poems from other authors into the English language, which in turn influenced his own writing. This later style was summed up by Paul Zweig in the Partisan Review. Long before he was awarded the Pulitzer Prize, Wright had been acknowledged by a generation of poets as the artisan of a new language for poetry, a style of pastoral surrealism built around strong images and a simple spoken rhetoric. Wright's art lay not in complex grammar, but in a stark structure of perceptions, which became their own statement. Wright redefined his writing style over and over again, but consistently explored themes of transcendence from loneliness and isolation, peppered with images of Martins Ferry. Wright had nightmares he would wind up back in Ohio, a broken man, working in the steel mill or coal mines. Even though themes of separation were the focus of his work, his poetry could also be, at the same time, life-affirming. He celebrated the beauty in nature and his connection to animals. This next poem is a perfect example of the combination of isolation and optimism found in his poetry. Note the imagery hearkening back to Martin's Ferry and the optimism expressed through animal interaction. 2 hangovers. Number 1. I slouch in bed. Beyond the streaked trees of my window, all groves are bare. Locusts and poplars change to unmarried women, sorting slate from anthracite between railroad ties. The yellow-bearded winter of the Depression is still alive somewhere, an old man counting his collection of bottle caps in a tar paper shack under the cold trees of my grave. I still feel half drunk, and all those women beyond my window are hunching toward the graveyard. Drunk, mumbling Hungarian, the sun staggers in and his big, stupid face pitches into the stove. For 2 hours I have been dreaming of green butterflies searching for diamonds in coal seams, and children chasing each other for a game through the hills of fresh graves. But the sun has come home drunk from the sea, and Sparrow outside sings of the Hannah Coal Company and the dead moon. The filaments of cold light bulbs tremble in music like delicate birds. Oh, turn it off. Number 2. I try to waken and greet the world once again. In a pine tree, a few yards away from my windowsill, a brilliant blue jay is springing up and down on a branch. I laugh as I see him abandon himself to entire delight, for he knows as well as I do that the branch will not break. The same themes of isolation and appreciation of nature are also expressed in A Blessing, read here by Wright.
The next poem is another description. It's called A Blessing. Just off the highway to Rochester, Minnesota, twilight bounds softly forth on the grass, and the eyes of those 2 Indian ponies darken with kindness. They have come gladly out of the willows to welcome my friend and me. We step over the barbed wire into the pasture where they have been grazing all day alone. They ripple tensely. They can hardly contain their happiness that we have come. They bow shyly as wet swans. They love each other. There is no loneliness like theirs. At home once more, they begin munching the young tufts of spring in the darkness. I would like to hold the slenderer one in my arms, for she has walked over to me and nuzzled my left hand. She is black and white. Her mane falls wild on her forehead, and the light breeze moves me to caress her long ear that is delicate as the skin over a girl's wrist. Suddenly I realize that if I stepped out of my body, I would break into blossom.
James Wright died of tongue cancer in March of 1980 at the age of 52. He was highly influential to a generation of contemporary poets, including Pulitzer winner Mary Oliver, who wrote 3 poems for James Wright upon hearing of his death. This next poem is my own ode to James Wright in blank verse, an attempt at his theme and style. An autumn day in Boise, in the park across the river. The aspen trees quake as pines drop needles onto the wet earth, falling like the rain. The sky is crisp and blue as glacial ice. An eagle soars overhead and cries out. She knows her purpose much better than I. A fish glitters in talons clutched tightly, and women push strollers with babes in fleece, their cheeks pink as fresh-picked harvest apples. The autumn wind sends chills into my soul. Will life drag me back into the darkness? The mine, where black-hazed haggard dames who push their wheelbarrows across the fields of gray, brimming with coal, like burnt babes of apples. Please, God, let me stay in this fresh moment. And here are my sources and works cited.